Hello. Thank you, Mada. It's so refreshing to actually do a Leetspeak where I'm not the first person to go on stage. Has never happened before. Thank you for a great introduction. It was really nice to hear. So I'm going to talk a little bit about building for the globe. This talk is about democracy, it's about trust, and it's about technology in some sense. I would say it's kind of a mix of optimism, pessimism, and realism in my personal struggles to figure out and understand, what is the future of technology? What's going to be the next big thing? And how is that going to affect us, both as, tech people, but also as a whole society in an economical sense. So, in the last few years, we have become increasingly global. And when I say that, what I mean is we're more interconnected with each other. It's easier to get a hold of people. I think this is due to two things, of course. Number one is the internet. It's been growing and it's a very, very easy way to get in touch with people. Also, the tools on the internet have expanded. And the other thing is the growth of devices and availability of devices. So computers, cell phones, tablets that are connected. So today, most people in the world have some sort of means of getting online or getting in contact with people online, not necessarily by owning their own device. So the geographical distances that used to exist, they kind of don't matter that much anymore. So, especially for us in the digital crafts, right? It's not so important where you are, it's more what you know. We see this tendency towards more remote work, we see the tendency towards remote first teams, and it's more about the right people than the right locations. We have whole regions today that are just completely jumping the whole computer thing. They go right into mobile. They're like mobile-only societies or mobile-only regions. I think this is both good and bad. Good for all the reasons I mentioned before. We are now more connected. People have more means of communicating when things go bad and then when things go good. Why it's bad, I'll come back to that later. But it is for everyone. So I heard this story just the other day, coming back to the good part, from a colleague of mine. He said that, my kids use the iPad to talk to their family in Tunis. Not like I help them, but like they take the iPad out themselves and dial in and talk to their family. So this is stuff that like 4-year-olds can do. Super simple. Super simple to get in touch with people. Hasn't always been that way, right? Communication used to be expensive. This is a very, very rough graph, so don't get too caught up on the timelines. Especially if you try to communicate to large amounts of people at the same time. You used to have to write letters and send them by courier or actually arrange face-to-face meetings with people so you can meet and talk to them and communicate. When the Gutenberg press was created, that kind of helped the situation, but we still had a distribution problem. Now we can mass produce messages, but we couldn't distribute them. And also, fun story, the first things, or amongst the first things printed on the Gutenberg press was somebody that came up with, hey, I know what people will pay for, erotic novels. So that happened. It took another 150 years from that happening until the first scientific journal was published. That says something about how we utilize technology, and I'll just gonna leave that thought with all of you guys. Just let that be there. So, I think in 1792, it was like the first time we had this feeling of speed in communication because we got the telegraph. And then after that, all the other stuff came. The radios, the phones, TVs, if you think about one-way communication. Then we got ARPANET, CompuServe, email. In the 80s, we had Usenet and BBSs. I myself used to dial into BBSs. You left messages, you disconnected, and then that BBS called another BBS and left the messages. It was like the big network of just stuff leaving messages all over the place. Awesome stuff. Then IRC came, and that was a revolution in and of itself, just like real-time chat, crazy stuff. 20 years later, we saw things like LiveJournal and Friendster pop up. So you could argue that these were the first blogging network and first actual social media. But it took until the burst of the dot-com bubble till we got what we call the social media revolution of today, where we got the Facebooks and the LinkedIns. Like everybody became a publisher all of a sudden, for good and bad. So now everybody can post their thoughts online. Clay Shirky, that does a lot of research into this, he's like this social media researcher guy. If you haven't read anything from him, do so. He says a new form of arguing has been invented in our lifetimes. In the last decades, in fact, it's large, it's distributed, it's low cost, and it's compatible with the ideals of democracy. So the way I interpret Clay is basically, he means that everybody can be a publisher and everybody can read something, and it's cheap. What he doesn't mention is who owns the things we publish and who owns the things we publish to. So I said this was a mix of optimism, pessimism, and realism. So here comes the cold shower thing. So in order to talk about those things, we need to talk about infrastructure. Stuff that people don't really think about, but we do, right? We write code, publish it somewhere, and it needs to run somewhere. We need to talk about hosting. We need to talk about the publishing platforms. We need to talk about the system, what goes inside of the system, and then where that system actually runs. So, back in '91, it was a simpler time. You had a connection and you got a server. Connected your server to the internet or to the net, and you can run your stuff there, right? Not everybody could do that because servers were expensive and connections were, reserved for universities and research organizations. So a few years later, in '95, we got the internet and we started seeing emergence of web hosting, GeoCities, Passagen. I had some, 10 megabytes from my ISP where you can upload web pages and host them. And then shared hosting, co-location services. We, in a sense, started taking some control back over our data because we bought the servers and then we rented the space to store those servers. And then again, dot-com bubble burst, and this whole cloud thing became huge. Cloud, now everything is cloud. Nobody knew what cloud was when it came, but then people figured out it was just somebody else's computer. And again, we put the control of everything we own somewhere else. We just gave it up. So now we know AWS and Azure are like the two prominent things, and we design everything for cloud first, or cloud only. We build the systems in the cloud. So, in a sense, this is, I would say this is some kind of feudalism. It's one owner, many workers. And the structure of who actually owns something, well, to say the least, it's complicated because there's agreements amongst each other, who owns things. But when it really, really goes bad, who actually owns it? Because you put your system on somebody else's servers and then your users put information into your system. It kind of becomes obscure. So we have this centralization problem. So as long as there exists any type of central entity, this is going to be an issue. It might be a server, a government, company, or an institution, but as long as it's centralized, we have this centralization problem. We have to trust in that entity for them to do the right thing and be okay. And when it works, it's glorious. But what happens at some point if we stop trusting that entity? Or even worse, what happens if that entity stops trusting us? What happens when, government or organization or something turns against us? In 2011, most social media was cut out of Egypt for 5 days. Or the Mugabe government in Zimbabwe, they started printing money to finance the Congo war, causing hyperinflation and destabilizing the whole economy, basically stealing people's money. What happens then? And you say like, yeah, sure, but what happens when Lehman Brothers comes over and says, hey guys, you want us to help you out with your savings? Or Bernie Madoff comes over and says like, hey, I have this great idea for a fund, do you want to invest in it? So these things are, this problem is everywhere. And we could just go say like, yeah, but these are these few bad guys and we just shouldn't trust them, and move to another country, move to another currency, move to another financial institution and just be fine with it. We haven't actually solved the centralization problem. Now we just put our trust in another central entity which we think is more stable than the first central entity we had. So no matter if it's Mugabe or Lehman or the Egyptian government, it's none of them that actually pays for it. Because it's the people in the end that pay for it. In the end, it's the people that suffer. And I think it comes down to trust. And we need to ask ourselves this very core question of who can we actually trust? Who can we put our trust in? So this brings me to a problem of a couple of generals. More notably, the Byzantine generals problem. So this is a problem defined in 1982, and in the simplicity, the problem basically states that there are a couple of generals that are planning an attack on a city, and they need to be coordinated. They need to know that the messages they send to each other have not been tampered with, that they need to know that none of them is a traitor, and they need to know synchronized whether to attack or not at the same time. In a centralized solution, this is not a problem. All of them has a radio, a commander yells out the order, and everybody get the order at the same time. In a decentralized system without that commander, the generals left to synchronize amongst themselves. This is a real issue. But decentralized is hard. This problem is hard. That's why we have so many centralized solutions. So some of you already might know where I'm going with this. Of course, there is this solution for this problem, which is called the blockchain. Most notably, the blockchain of Bitcoin fame. But it's a tool that can be used for a lot of different things. For the ones that don't know so much about it, I'm just going to have this gross oversimplification and saying the blockchain is like a database. It's a public database, so it's not owned by anyone. It's distributed, so no data is stored centrally. It's synchronized, so that all the transactions are kept up to date, and secured by cryptography to make it tamper-proof, or at least tamper-proof unless you get a supercomputer. So it's secure-ish. And when we move into a decentralized reality, things become far more complicated. All the models we need to figure out are complicated, the software is more complicated, the solutions are more complicated, so we tend not to do it. I'm sure all of you remember your first interaction with Git. And just like went, what is this black magic? Like, come on, we used to check stuff into a server and we checked it out and that was fine, and now we have all these branches and nonlinear histories, and this is crazy talk. But everybody, or most people here, are probably fluent in Git right now. I'm sure people outside of this room still use it like a central thing by checking in, checking out. But that's not what the tool is built for. But this illustrates the complexity of going from central to decentralized. And this is the same complexity we as a society are facing right now. So it's cooperation without coordination, basically. So why am I standing here? I've produced a problem. And I've also produced a solution. Now, this should all be fine right now. We should be done here. And yet still, the problem exists. Does anyone else find this weird? I would say that the reason we still feel that this problem exists is because, despite what people might tell us, we as tech people are not problem-oriented. We are very, very solution-oriented. We're solution-oriented to the point that we make up abstract problems and try to solve them. So when the blockchain was invented, nobody went and said, I'm going to solve corrupt governments, or I'm going to go solve problems with the currency, or I'm going to solve something else. They just went, Byzantine generals, that seems interesting. Let me solve that one. So now we have this cool tech, and we're just struggling of where to apply it in the real world. And we will figure it out. Because, I mean, the tech is not the issue. It's the world that needs to adapt. It's the financial models that need to adapt. I mean, streaming services didn't take a real hold until we figured out the legal issues around streaming services and until we figure out the subscription-based model. Same thing goes for sharing economies like Uber or Airbnb. You know, it's when you figure out the financial model around that you can launch it. And the problem with the decentralized financial models we have today is that they're kind of built on you get paid for what you do. You give me money, I build you this system. Done. You don't make any more money beyond that because the system is decentralized. It's out there in the wild. But, you know, many here says, oh, that's really nice. Like, that's really good that we get paid for what we do. But seriously, if people were okay with just getting paid for what they do, why are there so many startups in Silicon Valley? I mean, the startups are the lottery tickets of the software developer. You know the biggest chances to fail, and you still go out and do it. The secure option is just getting paid for what you do. Not trying to aim for the unicorn, not trying to aim for the big thing. And this is the problem with distributed tech. We haven't figured out a way to make it scale. At least not in a financial model sense. So, even though it solves a real life problem, you know, problems of middlemen, corrupt governments, and corrupt institutions, problems that are everywhere, but most prominently in developing countries. We still don't have any drive to apply it. We still don't do it. And remember in the beginning I told you there was two problems with mobile becoming bigger. I'm going to show you a graph here. This is stats worldwide of if you look at desktop computers or computers, creation devices, and mobile devices and tablets. This is worldwide how the trend has looked. It's percentage, so it's not it's not that we have less computers. It's just that the percents take out each other. And then this is the one for Africa. I mean, Africa has always been a mobile-first continent. Already in 2012, people used SMS to Google search and receive emails. So, however, this increase in mobile devices, it's also taking away some of the power. Because mobile devices are, in a sense, at least for computer systems and technology, not creation devices. These are not the things you build the systems on. These are not the things that you program on, at least not today. So this fabulous thing, the computer, which allows you to access and build magnificent systems and publish them and gain power, it's not available to a lot of the people that will actually need it. Because having a computer, it makes you a producer, a game changer. And I think less people are becoming producers and more people are becoming consumers of software. And I think that's a worrying trend. So if I'm going to leave with one message here for Building for the Globe, it's basically, be the producer, be the ruler of the next era, set the trends, and help others do the same. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great Leetspeak.